For as long as I can remember, my wife would say to me, "That's not what I meant." Well, the fact that English isn't her first language and her vocabulary, although it's very good, it's, relatively speaking, more limited than mine, but for heaven's sakes, I was born and raised in the US, right? So it's understandable when you consider the language and vocabulary differences that there's bound to be some communication issues. I think it's been a combination of lots and lots of small misunderstandings that would, build up over time. And then we'd have a bigger misunderstanding. And that would elicit an exaggerated response. And that in turn would send us spiraling into a fight. What was happening was she would say something with one intent. And I would hear those same words, but I would impose my own thoughts, my own intentions on top of those words. And typically, the thoughts and intentions that I imposed were negative or had negative connotations, and hence I would give a negative reaction. Just for an example, I had spent some spare time over the course of several days building a little pathway, some little walkway on the side of the house. I was using up old brick pavers that were left over, and I had built a little curve into it. I thought it looked really nice. So the time came where I go in the house, I'm going to get my wife and have her come out and make an inspection, right? So we get out there together, and I thought she would just be forthcoming with a compliment or even compliments. What she said was, "It's so narrow." Now, I don't know how that just came out just now with me reenacting that, but in all fairness, I don't recall her having any sort of sarcastic tone in her voice. Honestly, I just remember it being more of a matter-of-fact kind of statement. But in any event, I was expecting, I was wanting a compliment. And when I didn't get that, I think I translated her words into an insult. And, later, much later, she explained that she was merely making an observation. She wasn't making a critique. But I reacted by going silent. I probably put my head down, and I was picking up tools, a couple tools that I had left on the ground, and she sees my reaction. She recognizes my reaction as being one of my typical negative type reactions. And when she sees this, she becomes upset. And from there, that takes us into a prolonged period of silence between the two of us. And when I say prolonged, I'm sure we didn't talk to each other until the next day or even later. So what could have been was supposed to be a happy moment, even a celebratory moment, right? It, for no good reason, turns ugly. And it all could have been averted with simple communication, maybe even some humor, anything actually other than what I did. Being silent like that is one of two typical reactions that I have as my negative reactions to something. Now that silence combined with leaving the room or leaving the area when circumstances permit. I'll often combine those two, silence and leaving. Another typical negative response that I give is a facial expression. My wife likes to refer to that expression as my weapon face. I'm going to try and demonstrate that for you. I don't know if I can, but I'm going to try, and I'd like you to tell me if you can see it. Now first, I'm going to give you my typical bored, staring at a boring TV show look, and then I'll follow up. I'll try and transition into my weapon face. So here we go. Here's my bored TV look. Okay, now here's my attempt at a weapon face. Okay, I don't know if you can see any difference or not. The corners of my mouth go down anyway, naturally. I'm not happy with that, but that's the way I'm built. Anyway, I have a totally separate video on my typical reactions that I'd like you to see too. At some point after a fight, we would end up going over what was said in a pretty detailed manner, you know, sentence by sentence. And she would inevitably say, "That's not what I meant." And by her saying those words time after time, you know, in hindsight, it tells me she knew the whole time there was a problem. She knew there was a disconnect. I would always be very dismissive of these kinds of miscommunications. I just say, "Oh, honey, everybody has misunderstandings and miscommunications. It's typical for couples." But the fact is, the problem was mine. And, you know, it makes me sad to think that here she was identifying a problem, and I wasn't doing anything to address it. I wasn't doing anything to understand it. And, you know, looking back, I believe these types of miscommunications were the source of more fights for us than any other cause. So, one day we present this whole situation to our marriage counselor. And, you know, many things were discussed, but one thing stood out to me that the counselor said, and that was her explanation to me that the act of my imposing my thoughts and my feelings on my wife's words was known as a boundary violation. For years and years and years, it was ingrained in my head that my wife said things to be mean or insulting to me. You know, and that's always been so conflicting because, you know, on the one hand, we're both nice people and we have demonstrated to each other time and time again that we love and care for each other. And then on the other hand, she has warts. No, on the other hand, I'd ask myself, why is she saying things to be so hurtful to me? Anyway, we're in the counselor's office, and it is made very clear to me that my wife is not making statements to be intentionally mean or derogatory toward me. I am the one that is making boundary violations. Okay, great. So something's been identified. Now, how do we proceed to correct it? Well, the first thing I did, right then and there, sitting there on the counselor's couch, I told myself, the past is the past, and I am going to remove all of those years of thinking that my wife was saying negative things about me. So just like that, I flipped a switch in my head and bam, I made it disappear. I'll tell you what, that was a huge mental achievement for me. And after that, you know what? I felt relieved. I felt unburdened. I just felt better. I'm sure our counselor had plenty of advice for us that day, but one thing that stands out was She said, Cass, if you don't understand something that your wife's saying, or if you get it in your head that she's saying something negative, just, step back, calm down, compose yourself, and say, honey, what do you mean? What are you trying to tell me? Or something to that effect. That's key for me. It's me asking for an explanation, not me imposing my thoughts on what she said. It might sound simple for you to hear me say it, but for me to actually start incorporating that, it was a big step for me. Our counselor also warned us that it will take some time to learn this technique because we have spent so much time in this destructive cycle. And boy, she wasn't kidding. It has taken literally years of effort on both of our parts to try and undo this bad behavior. So, what is a boundary violation? Well, in my wife and I's instance, I always attributed it to language and a vocabulary issue. But interestingly enough, I happened to be on an airplane one time and I struck up a conversation with a fellow passenger, a female, and she had a boyfriend, and her boyfriend were both born and raised in the U.S., and she said, just like me, he would impose negative connotations on things that she would say. So that leads me to believe that there's more to it than just language and vocab. Undoubtedly, there's any number of reasons that might prompt this type of boundary violation type behavior. But just to name a few right here, you can think of things like maybe jealousy might prompt that kind of behavior, or confidence issues, the lack of confidence or even overconfidence, language differences, cultural misunderstandings, just to name a few. There are actually entire books devoted to the topic of boundary violations. And if it sounds like something that relates to an issue that you're having, I would certainly encourage you to read up on it. It's a vast topic. It includes things not only like physical violations, but also mental violation and emotional violations. It's a fascinating topic, and I think you'll enjoy reading up on it. Anyway, that's all I have for you this round, and I want to offer you a sincere thank you for watching.